So now we know basically everything there is to know about Ray Lewis's professional football career. So let's compare him to his contemporaries. First, however, I want to talk about some honorable mentions. These are defensive greats who are pretty clearly not in the same tier as Ray Lewis. And when I was making my list, they didn't make the top 10 list of best defensive players ever, but they were close. They're fantastic players in their own right, and I do want to take this opportunity to talk about them. So in this video, we're going to quickly go over 10 players who didn't make the cut in my evaluations, but I want to mention them anyway. As you watch this video, keep three basic tenets in mind. When I was evaluating all these great defensive players, I kept three things in mind. Number one, they should have been the cornerstone player of a great defense at some point in their career. They should have led some dominant defensive unit at least once, preferably a few times in their career, to be in the top 10. Number two, they must have won at least one NFL Defensive Player of the Year award. Unless, of course, they played in the era before official Defensive Player of the Year awards. And, even Dick Butkus, way back before the Associated Press was doing Defensive Player of the Year, still was able to win some kind of unofficially. And number three, if they have not won at least one Super Bowl, they better have done something else that's really incredible for me to consider them as a top 10 player. With all that in mind, let's take a look at guys who are great, maybe elite, but I couldn't quite put them at the elite of the elite. So we're going to start at what is effectively the 20th spot on this list. Ed Reed, quick look at his stats: 61 interceptions, 1,547 return yards, 9-time Pro Bowler, 5-time first-team All-Pro, 134 approximate value points, 1-time Super Bowl champion, and 1-time NFL Defensive Player of the Year award. And just for fun, his 9 postseason interceptions are tied for first in NFL history. One thing I would like to see from the rest of Reed's career, because he's the only player on this list who is still active, not counting Ray Lewis, and obviously we all know that he's not playing again. But I would like to see him be the lead, the head, or the cornerstone of an elite NFL defense. It might be a little too late for him to do that because he is getting older. We don't know what he's going to do this offseason, but I did throw him in at number 20. Next, we have Michael Strahan, next honorable mention, a recent retiree. Quick look at his stats: 854 tackles, 141.5 sacks, 7-time Pro Bowler, 4-time first-team All-Pro. Those numbers are a little thin, but 160 approximate value is very strong. 1-time Super Bowl champion, 1-time NFL Defensive Player of the Year. And as I'm sure all of you know, his 22.5 sacks in one season is still the official single-season record. Next honorable mention, we've got Dick Richard Night Train Lane, old school player, 68 interceptions, 1,207 return yards, 7-time Pro Bowler, 6-time first-team All-Pro, 137 approximate value, and his 14 interceptions in his rookie season remains the single-season record, which is pretty incredible given how our league has evolved today into a much more pass-happy league. Now, he never won a Defensive Player of the Year award officially or unofficially, and he never won a Super Bowl, so I never really considered him for top 10, but he's definitely belonging at least in the top 20. Next, we've got Paul Krause, another old-school defensive back, 81 interceptions, 1,185 return yards, 8-time Pro Bowler, 8-time All-Pro guy, approximate value 181. And his 81 interceptions remains a career record. And I don't see anybody coming up on the horizon who can break that. Again, another incredible little quirk of NFL history. No Super Bowl titles and no Defensive Player of the Year award. It's kind of hurt him historically, but there's no denying his career impact as a safety for the Vikings and the Redskins. Next, we got Mike Singletary, the great Chicago Bears middle linebacker. Quick look at the career: 1,488 tackles, 19 sacks, 10-time Pro Bowler, 8-time first-team All-Pro, approximate value 159, 1-time Super Bowl champion, and he won the Defensive Player of the Year award twice. And his 2 fumble recoveries in a single Super Bowl game — he had 2 fumble recoveries in Super Bowl 20, remains tied for the record in a single Super Bowl game. I mean, you really could argue that Singletary deserves to be higher on this list, maybe even in the top 10, but for reasons I'll get into shortly in this video, I don't think he belongs up there because I think there was another player on that 85 Bears team that was actually better. Number 15, next honorable mention, we got Jack Lambert, another great linebacker for a great defense. 1,479 tackles, 23.5 sacks, 28 interceptions, 9 Pro Bowls, 7-time first-team All-Pro, approximate value of 146, 4-time Super Bowl champion, and 1-time NFL Defensive Player of the Year. The most amazing thing I could find about Jack Lambert was in 1976, the Steelers, over the first 5 games of that season, suffered many injuries, including to their best player, Mean Joe Green. I believe Terry Bradshaw was included on that list. They lost some other key players as well. And the defense realized that the only way they were going to win is if they played absolutely dominant every game. So over the last 9 games of that season, the Steelers defense allowed a grand total of 28 points, which is slightly more than 3 points per game. They pitched 5 shutouts in that period as well, and I believe they won all those games. So that just blew me away, and Jack Lambert was the leader of the team at that time because of all the injuries. So I think that's a good testament to how tremendous a player he was. Okay, next up we got Deacon Jones, the great Rams defensive end. Now, I'm going to have a caveat about these stats in a minute here, but for now, let's just look at them and be amazed. 173.5 sacks, 8-time Pro Bowler, 5-time first-team All-Pro, 136 approximate value, and 2-time NFL Defensive Player of the Year. Now, in a single season, he once amassed 26 sacks, which would be by far the single-season record. However, back then, back when Deacon Jones played, sacks were an unofficial stat. They weren't counted until I believe it was 1981. So technically Deacon Jones has 0 career sacks. But people who actually watched the games and made note of things could say, oh, this is how many times he tackled a quarterback in the backfield for a loss. And they unofficially gave him 26 sacks one season, which would be by far the record. Unfortunately, officially we don't count it, so we'll just make unofficial note of it here. Next, Bob Lilly. Great defensive tackle for the old Dallas Cowboys teams, 94.5 sacks, 11-time Pro Bowler, very high number right there, 8-time first-team All-Pro, approximate value of 172, very strong number on this list especially, and a 1-time Super Bowl champion. And Bob Lilly, he played 14 years, and back then they had 14-game seasons, so he could have played in a maximum of 196 regular season games, and he played in all of them. And given that he was a defensive tackle in the 70s, that's just absolutely an incredible amount of durability. So you got to give it up to Bob Lilly for an achievement like that. Starting to get very hard to leave these dominant players off the top 10, but I had to make some tough choices, and here we go. Richard Dent, in my opinion, the cornerstone of that great 85 Bears defense. Look at his career, 671 tackles, 137.5 sacks, 4-time Pro Bowler, kind of a low number, 5-time first-team All-Pro. I mean, you know, that makes complete sense. He has more first-team All-Pros than Pro Bowls. Approximate value, 122, kind of a low number. 2-time Super Bowl champion, even if his last ring was with the 49ers when he barely played, and 1-time Super Bowl MVP. And you know, that Super Bowl MVP that he won really boosts him up, in my opinion, historically, because that's something very few defensive players have done. And the most impressive achievement that he did, in my opinion, over his career was in 3 postseasons for the 1985 season. So technically the games were played in 1986. In those 3 games, he recorded 6.5 sacks and forced 5 fumbles. That just, in my opinion, really proves that Richard Dent was the core reason why that 85 Bears defense was so dominant, especially in that playoff run. Lastly, broke my heart to leave this guy off the top 10, but he just barely missed the cut for one reason. He doesn't have a Defensive Player of the Year award. But other than that, everything else is there. Ronnie Lott, one of the great NFL safeties. 1,113 tackles, 63 picks, 10-time Pro Bowler, 8-time All-Pro first team, approximate value 160, and he is a 4-time Super Bowl champion. But no DPOTY means I don't think I can justify him being in the top 10. However, just to bring everything back full circle, Ronnie Lott is the player who is tied with Ed Reed for most postseason interceptions. They both have 9. So Lott holds that record for now, and he better just hope Ed Reed never makes another postseason. Doubt it. All right, so those are our honorable mentions. Let's give a hand to them, but they don't quite make the top 10. But we'll talk a lot more about that top 10 in future videos.